Christ is risen. It's been almost 20 years in the ministry now, and during those years, I've seen my fair share of death, either with members of congregation over the course of years, and especially, it is true, even before then, because I grew up the son of a Lutheran minister. And oftentimes, the parsonage would be right next door to the church or across the street from the church. And so, oftentimes, as a boy, you'd be playing in the yard, or you'd be up in your room and you'd look out the window and you'd see one of two things. Either you would see a car pull up, draped with streamers, and then a bunch of cans on a string hanging off the fender, or you would see a funeral hearse pull up, unloading or loading a casket. So either it would be this joyous celebration, or it would be solemn silence. And you're seeing this as a kid, and, well, you see it, and then you just go back to playing G.I. Joe. But that all changed the summer of 1978. My family moved from New Ulm, Minnesota, to this little northern Wisconsin town hugging the shoreline of Lake Michigan. And as a fourth grader, that it's a big adventure, right? It's going to be a new town. It's going to be a new home, just this big, they just don't build them like that, but this 1930s house, and on the second floor, you'd have a winding wood staircase to get up there. And I remember just racing up the steps to pick out the bedroom that I wanted before my brother pummeled me. And then all of a sudden, the moving truck pulls up and you're unpacking, and it's just pure excitement that first day of moving. At the end of the day, my dad said, "Tell you what, let's go get what makes Wisconsin famous." And if I said that, you would say, I'm so glad. I thought you were going to say beer. And so we did. It was a little local cheese factory, Renard's, about 5 miles to the north. And there is nothing like being able to buy some fresh cheese curds and they squeak in between your teeth. And you know how some things are just, after a while, they are just indelibly imprinted upon your memory? And when you recall them, it's almost as fresh as if it were yesterday. What I remember most wasn't that the cheese store was constructed in the shape of a round chunk of cheese with a wedge missing where the front door was. It wasn't that. What I remember the most was the return trip. And as we crossed over the bridge that took us over Little Anape River, I saw all the flashing lights down by the shoreline. I saw a couple of boats hovering nearby. And after we got home, and a few minutes later, the phone rang in the parsonage office. My dad answered it, and within a couple of minutes, he just left. I mean, the van is in the process of being unpacked. No beds are even made. He was just gone. It turned out that someone had slipped and drowned in that river. And it happened to be a member of the church that my dad had just arrived to serve. And he was 9 years old. And even though we had just been there for a couple of days, it was custom that you would pay your respects at the visitation a few days later. And you know how there are some things indelibly imprinted into your memory that you never forget? I remember looking down into a casket at a boy who was my age. And he was wearing the same glasses that I was. I remember looking at that boy's face and thinking to myself, he was supposed to be my classmate in the very same room in school that I was going to be starting in just a few weeks. But there's a boy with glasses, but now I'm never going to have a chance to be his friend. I'm never going to know him. He's gone. And it wasn't because I was in a new town. It wasn't because I was living in a new house. But that night, for the first time in my young life, I could not sleep. After having such a close, sudden encounter with death, it drove a stake of fear right through my little heart. And I thought to myself, if someone my age with glasses can die, then what prevents me from being next? And what if I fall asleep tonight? Is there the very real possibility, just maybe, I won't wake up? I know you're thinking, it's supposed to be Easter, and here we are. All we're talking about is dwelling upon death. But do you get a feel for how people must have woke up that very first Easter morning? What did they wake up to? Wasn't this. Those early disciples of Jesus, those very first women that you told about in the Easter morning story, they were on their way slowly, trudging. They were dealing with the past pain of recent events. I mean, think about it. They had watched Jesus be crucified on Good Friday. And like me, they had seen a dead body. Someone had to pull out the nails from him in order that he could be disattached from the cross. Someone had to pick out the grave clothes that he was to be worn before gently laying him in the tomb. Someone has to make the funeral preparations after someone dies. And so there they are. Who's going to plan out the mop-up work and return to make the final preparations on his body before one last time and then forever the casket cover would be shut? So you tell me, do you really think those women, after going through all of that recent pain, do you really think you would be able to just go home and sleep sound? Or do you think they would have been like me? You can't fall asleep because of the raw pain of the recent past. You know, sometimes your past is too painful to confront. It makes it hard sometimes just to wake up in the morning and blink awake with just a smile on your face. No, that's tough. Why? Because you're thinking. You're thinking of failures. Maybe you failed your family. Maybe you failed your friends. Maybe you failed God. And now you're living with regret. And now you're dealing with the burden of guilt. And the thing is, you tell yourself, just don't think of it, and it'll go away. But it's not going to work. Somehow, you have to deal with it. And all of us have different ways of dealing with guilt and regret that comes from the past. Some of us, we strike up these bargains with ourselves. We say, you know, God, if it all works out, if you will help me this time, God, I promise this will never happen again. Some of us promise to make it up to the people whom we hurt most. And so then we, almost in a way, we begin to overcompensate, both physically and emotionally. And then some of us, we just do nothing. You know, let's see. Put a little distance between the pain and just let as much time go by that separates us from the two. And then it'll all just go away. Well, let me ask you, how's that working? None of those different ways, they truly can free us from our past guilt. You know, all that they are is just little small self-fixes when really what you and I need this morning is an emergency, drastic, life-saving surgery. It's like putting little Band-Aids over a gaping wound of guilt and regret that never seems to go away. If I'm going to get over my fear of death, if those ladies are going to get over the pain of their recent past, and if you are going to get over your guilt and regret from failures, then we are going to need something more. You know how sometimes there are words that are indelibly imprinted into your memory and you never forget them? I remember being on that night after seeing a dead boy. I remember being in my bed, scared, and my mom came in. And she sat at the edge of the bed. And she took my hand. And she said, "This is why we believe in Jesus. This is why he came. And this is why we trust his promises." And then, that night, she began to retell me the Easter story, kind of like we did with the children this morning. She told me about the Jesus who came, who died on the cross, but that he didn't stay dead. He came back to life. And because Jesus is alive, it means that that little boy with glasses, she assured me, death is no longer going to hurt him. And then she promised me, because also Jesus lives for you, death is not going to hurt you someday as well. And you know what? Growing up as the son of a Lutheran minister, I had celebrated so many other Easters in a church. But that summer of 1978, in an upstairs bedroom, I celebrated Easter for the very first time. And I understood what it meant for me. And that's astounding when you think about it. How could my mom be able to connect an alive Jesus with a little boy? And I think she picked up something from some other women who this morning on that first Easter, they went out to the tomb, and what they were expecting isn't what they found. We're told in the gospel account that the guards were gone. They saw that the stone was rolled away. And then when they went inside to investigate, an angel spoke. And here's what he said, and I quote him, "Do not be afraid. You are looking for Jesus of the Nazarene who was crucified." And then the angel spoke words that would forever change their lives. The angel said, "Jesus is not here. Christ has risen."
He's risen indeed.
Yep. But that wasn't it. And then as they were going back to be able to tell Jesus' disciples everything that they had heard, all of a sudden we're told Jesus met them. And you know the first word that he said to them? "Good morning." To really understand the implication of that, I want you to consider this. ABC, there's a new TV series that just started last month. It's entitled Resurrection. It's about the lives of the people of Arcadia, Missouri, that are forever affected when deceased loved ones come back to life and show up on their doorsteps. And maybe you even saw that TV commercial where it shows a middle-aged guy. He comes up to his front screen door, he opens it up, and there's his little boy who had died 25 years earlier. And there he is, just as he always was. And you know that TV series is kind of playing upon your human heartstrings. It makes you think to yourself, what if that really happened? What if someone from your past, long gone, what if they came back to life? What if it was an old sweetheart? What if it was a mother or father, a husband or a wife? What if it was a brother or a sister or someone, a friend of yours whom you really loved, and all of a sudden you see them alive? You know what the reality is? ABC puts a little caption underneath the rating for it, and it says this: resurrection is a fantasy. You're watching fantasy. And I was reading a review online about this TV series, And one reviewer, she lamented, she said, "I hope someday we could all see the reality of being resurrected." And I just wanted to say, well, get here for Easter Sunday then. Because Easter Sunday is about resurrection, and it's real. This morning is not about this mystical Jesus, this kind of apparitional being that he's kind of shrouded in light and you can't really see. His face is just too fuzzy. We're not talking about the worship of a ghost. We're talking about in the flesh, alive. If Jesus came here today, he would go up to a window and his breath would fog it up. Because Jesus is alive. The ladies who came and saw him, who Jesus met, when they heard him, we're told that they fell down right before his feet. And they weren't fake. They were real feet. And they bowed down and worshiped him. And because of that, that is why they knew they were free. Because a risen Jesus means that we're free. And all of a sudden, those ladies, they were free from the pain of their recent past. They were free to believe all the promises of God, because the promises of God come true because he's risen. That means the promises of God in which he says, I'm going to come for you and I'm going to show you the way of how to get to God. It means it's true that he really did die, because you couldn't do anything about the sins that haunt you and the burdens that bring you down. And with his dying cry, "It is finished," all of a sudden, there is freedom from all of your failures of the past. All of the guilt and the regret that oftentimes comes so quickly to mind. Now, it's no longer a fantasy forgiveness. It's real and it's undeniable. Because Jesus is risen, you are free. So if an angel was able to tell women experienced deeply wounded on that first Easter morning, if he was able to help them with the words, "Do not be afraid, he is risen." And if a mom could assure her scared child, scared of death, if she could say to him, "Do not be afraid, Jesus is risen." And now a church full of people who have been plagued by pain of their past and living with regret, they hear these words, "Do not be afraid. He really is risen." It means then all sins of your past have been pardoned. All your guilt and regret is gone. Now you are free. You're free from it all. Free for what? How are you now going to live in this freedom the rest of this day? Why would you go back to that old, scared, worried way of life? Do you think the message of a resurrected Jesus just might have changed the outcome for a guy by the name of Kang Min Kyu? Know who I'm talking about? He's the vice principal of a high school where 323 students went on a spring trip. But he was the one who was rescued off that sunk South Korean ferry, while many of his students were. A couple days ago, they found his body hanging from a tree on an island nearby the wreckage. And in a suicide note that he left behind, he gave indication that he felt guilty for being alive, while more than 200 of his students were still missing and now they're presumed dead. And he wanted to take full responsibility. Oh, Kang, you did not have to take responsibility, because Jesus took all that responsibility on Good Friday. And Jesus is risen for guilty-feeling principles. Jesus is risen to comfort families of those drowned students. And Jesus is now risen today to free you from all of your worry. What are you worried about this morning? Are you worried about your kids? Worried about your health? Are you worried about your finances? Are you worried about your future? Did Jesus really rise from the dead in order that you just keep living the kind of life that you've been living, which is just live a little bit, then you die, and then that's it? Jesus rose in order to free you from that kind of thinking. A lot of years have separated me now from that upstairs bedroom of a fourth grader who is scared of death. But every time that as a pastor, I comfort those who have been wounded, dealing with regret and pain, grieving the loss of a loved one, I immediately go back up there to that upstairs room. And I'll tell you something. I have yet to find a message that can comfort better and bring solace to the human heart that is dragged down by pain, regret, and fear of death than the one that my mom shared with me, and that an angel shared with women, and that now Jesus is being able to share with you. Jesus is risen, and because of that, I know something else. Someday, I am going to see that little boy with glasses, but when I see him, he is going to be alive. And someday, when you think of that loved one, you will see them, and they are going to be alive. Because this life is just a preamble to the eternal life that is yet to come. And when you die, our Father is going to warmly welcome you with open arms. Why? Because Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Amen. Turn back in your service folder. There is an expression of our faith on page 9 called the Apostles' Creed. But when you get to the words